This first slide you're going to see is Ackle Island, County Mayo. And this photo was taken about 15 years ago when my son Edward was still very little. I wanted him to see where his people, the Gannons, were from. He's going to be returning there this summer. He just won a scholarship through the Irish American Society of Wil County, and he's going to be in Ireland all summer. Yeah, I know, that's Murphy. Murphy's too young. Murphy will go down the road, I hope. Murphy wants to be a police officer here in Joliet. Yeah, okay, so let's go to the next slide. So as we're getting underway here, I could not type everyone in, but there's so many families who sent me their photos, my coworkers, different museums, and I just want to say thank you. I tried to get to as many families as I could, but you know, we got a lot of Irish here. Next slide. Joliet area Irish have come a long way in the 180 plus years, but their road to success was paved with much sacrifice. During early settlement, local Irish immigrants often faced ethnic discrimination. Over time, they were able to break through those barriers. Why did so many Irish choose Wil County? Between 1845 and 1852, 1 million Irish died in what is known as the Potato Famine or Great Hunger. Another 1 million left Ireland for brighter futures, mainly in England, Australia, Canada, and the United States. Next slide. Famine-era Irish boarded so-called coffin ships because there was no fresh water for passengers. Diseases like cholera and typhus were rampant among the passengers. Many passengers died on these ships. And if they didn't die on the ship, they died right when they got off. The ones who survived went to the bigger cities like Boston, New York, and from there, many of them came here. Immigrants who came this way chose the Joliet and Chicago area specifically to work on the Illinois and Michigan Canal. Building of the canal occurred between 1836 and 1848. The first immigrants arrived in Chicago in 1837, and our first noted Irish immigrants in Wil County were in 1838. Next slide. Saying goodbye. Many families were permanently separated from each other. You know, never to see each other again, maybe to send letters back and forth. It was definitely a hardship. Let's go to the next slide. These next couple slides I'm going to talk about here are clippings from the Boston Pilot, which was sold in Joliet. This paper was a lifeline for Irish across America and back in the motherland during the famine. As you can see, families were trying to find each other, and this was the only way they could put an ad in the paper and say, I'm looking for my mother, I'm looking for my son, my father, my brother. Looking here on the bottom, you can see James McKenney of Castleberry landed in New York in 1850, and he was last seen in Joliet, Illinois. So he has family in Ohio who was looking for him. So hopefully they got reunited. Next slide. We've got George O'Brien, who left Limerick in 1851 and was in Joliet, and his wife was looking for him, his wife Agnes, and her maiden name was Kennelly. And then we've got James Maher of Castle Barrow, who left Joliet in 1855, or sorry, 1853, sorry, and was last seen in Wisconsin. So, you know, we think today we can just call somebody or email them, but, you know, you had none of that then. I mean, how are you going to know about your family? Next slide. Here's a nice photo of some Illinois and Michigan Canal workers. And, you know, as I said before, the building of the canal, many of them died of malaria. The conditions were deplorable, you know, and it was often said that all you needed to build the canal was a pickaxe and an Irishman. You know, they made less than $1 a day. Terrible. Next slide. And here's another look at the canal back in the day. And let's go to our next slide. And here's the payroll. Here's a list of some of the names. Hurley, Hennepin, Sullivan, O'Brien. Next slide. I found this very old piece of paper years ago while I was visiting the John Lamb collection at Lewis University. If you go to Lewis upstairs in the library, they have quite a few items. They're really great. You kind of have to know what you're looking for. It isn't displayed the same as we have it here, so you kind of have to ask. But anyway, Martin Bray enrolled in the Irish National Repeal Association in 1843. In the late 1800s, Daniel O'Connell was political leader of Ireland's Catholic majority. O'Connell wanted to repeal the union of Great Britain with Ireland, to let Ireland be run by the Irish, not the English. It had support from Catholics in Ireland and here in America. Next slide. Okay, here's St. Patrick's Church, the first Catholic church in this area. In 1838, Reverend John Francis Plunkett came to this area to minister to dying canal workers during a malaria epidemic. Plunkett himself was an Irish immigrant. He was appointed pastor, and construction of the original church on Broadway and Jefferson Street began. The church was a way for the Irish to tend to their spiritual needs, but also a form of socialization. So many Irish came here during the next several decades that there was a need for more Catholic churches in Joliet, but also for a bigger St. Pat's church. A new St. Pat's was built on Marion Street and had its first service in 1919. You might know this site better now as once the church quit being there, it became De La Salle High School, then it became Joliet Catholic High School, and now it's a home for seniors. Next slide. Political prejudice. As more Irish came to Joliet, so did more prejudice against Aaron's sons and daughters. In 1848, William Dolan and Francis Hennehan wrote a letter to the editor of the Joliet Signal detailing the discrimination they experienced by the local Democrat Party. Dolan and Hennehan noted how the Irish had been in Joliet for a decade, supported their local political party, but were still not allowed to participate in any county office or serve on a jury. Yet the German Catholics who were new to Joliet at this time seemed to bypass the Irish and were allowed to have those positions. That didn't last for too long because as the Irish had bigger families, there were more of them to vote. So let's go to our next slide. And as you can see here, this is the 1862 firemen's election. And I see some nice Irish names here: O'Brien, Rogan, McCarty, Clabby, and Cassidy, Lennon, and Bray. So very Irish fire department. Let's go to our next slide. And here's a benefit for the starving Irish. You know, although we were facing some discrimination, we didn't make very much money. The homeland was still on many people's mind. They didn't forget where they came from. And they had a ball in 1863 hosted at the Pomeroy's family farm in Troy Township. And tickets were $1. And I know that doesn't sound like much now, but when people were making less than $1 a day, that was a lot of money. And the money was going to help the starving in Ireland. Because people think of the famines like 1840s, 1850s. They were starving for a long time. On the committee here, we see Clunan, Brady, Rowan, McDonald, Dempsey, Kinsella, Dillon, Talbot, Clunan, McCarty. Next slide. And here's the results of that party. They raised $75 to send to the starving in Ireland. And it's to be noted, too, I've done some research on this, that Native Americans also gave corn to the Irish during the famine. They were anything to help them. Let's go to the next slide. And the Bannon family, we got some Bannon back there. All right, let me find my note here. I got out of order somehow. Bear with me. Where did my Bannons go? I believe they came from Roscommon, and Patrick Bannon, as I was talking earlier, was the son of immigrants, and he built 7 city schools. He built several churches here, including St. Mary Carmelite. And I know when he built it and he was up by the tower, he stood up there, and I can't imagine standing up there now, but he did back then, and he waved to the crowd. And you still have Bannons here today. LeBeau's florist was owned by the Bannon family. Very, very well-known family. All right, let's go to our next slide. And Brophy family. Another early Irish family in this area are the Brophies. Michael Joseph Brophy was born in Joliet in November of 1867. His parents were Edward Brophy and Anastasia Nolan. Edward was from Kilkenny. It's not certain what year he came to America, but he was married and having children in this area by the 1850s. Brophies are associated with Joliet and also Manhattan. Our next slide. Okay, here's another Brophy. This is Robert Brophy, who worked for the EJ&E Railroad. And next slide is my good friend Tim Brophy. He works at the county. He also sells real estate, and what's more fun about Tim is he and I are both on the board for the Irish American Society. He's a good man. All right, next slide. This is Dolan family. Do we have any Kilkenny people here? Okay, all right, I guess I'm the only one at the moment that you know of. Dolan family, this is their home on Bluff Street. It's now a parking lot for an apartment complex. These are my people, and I came about this photo in the most strangest of ways. About 30 years ago, my late mother was late for an estate sale in town. Normally she was #1 in line, like hours, way ahead of everybody, and for some reason she overslept. Everything was gone when she got there, and this was right over by College St. Francis. And they said, we have an old box of photos down in the basement in the coal bin. And she said, well, my daughter likes local history and photos. Maybe I'll get them for her. So they sold her the whole box for $5. So she buys the box. She brings them over to her aunt's house, Loretta Murphy. And Loretta says, my parents' wedding photo's in here. And it was our entire family. It was a cousin we didn't know about at that time. And she didn't have children, so nobody stayed in touch. So this photo of the Dolan home on Bluff Street, this is the only way I could see it. You know, it's gone now, it's a parking lot. Next slide. And this is Mrs. Dolan's son, my great-great-uncle, Jimmy Dolan. He was a lieutenant. He worked at JFD, and he had black lung, so he ended up retiring kind of early. He never married. His mom didn't want him to marry. His sisters didn't want him to marry. They wanted him, which you'll see in like Irish families, they want somebody to take care of the mom because she was a widow. And he had a fiance, and they put the kibosh on that. They're like, no wife for you. You got to stay home and take care of mom. So he never got married. Next slide. Jeremiah Mahoney's store. One of my mom's classmates at Joliet Township was Pat Mahoney Thompson. She was also Miss J of 1960, Pat was. And this shows Pat Mahoney's ancestor, Jeremiah Mahoney's store in downtown Joliet. And the store was right here at Cass in Chicago. And the neat thing about that is they would put water on the corner, and they'd make that a skating rink in the wintertime. And everybody could just go skating and forget business. And Jeremiah's family came to America from County Cork in the 1830s, and he had a store for more than 50 years. Shoppers would get their food from barrels, sacks, or boxes, and then have it weighed. All right, next slide. Rock Island Railroad, a big boon for Illinois, and certainly Joliet, was the Rock Island Railroad. In 1847, its predecessor, the Rock Island and LaSalle Railroad, was incorporated with the first train running in 1852. Initially, it offered passage between Chicago and Joliet, and then after that, passage with LaSalle and Rock Island, becoming the first line connecting Chicago with the Mississippi River. Next slide. All right, here's some local Irish politicians. Remember I said they had that discrimination in the beginning when they came here, but then they're like, you know what, we're just going to keep having people run. And here we are. We have Mayor Thomas Kelly, Attorney John Downey, Chief of Police John Gorman. I know somebody here said they had Gorman. Police Magistrate P.H. McSherry. Nice Irish names. And this was 1889, 1890. Next slide. All right, Patrick Haley. And how many of you are familiar with the Haley Mansion? Yeah, and Mr. Haley was born in New York and came with his family to Joliet as a child. And, oh, these are printed on the back, that's why. Okay, that's why I'm not seeing them. Patrick Columbus Haley was born in Clinton County, New York in 1849. His parents, Thomas and Hannah Haley, moved to Joliet when Patrick was just 2 years old. Haley attended law school, opening a firm with J.R. Flanders, later opening a firm with J.L. O'Donnell. They represented the railroads, including the EJ&E. Patrick Haley served as city attorney, alderman, and mayor of Joliet. His home is still there. I know they had a fire recently, and it is going to cost some money, but it looks like it's going to be saved. So that's great. That home on Center Street was built by famed architect Frank Shaver Allen, who was also a noted Egyptologist. If you look closely at the home, there's nods to Patrick's Irish heritage when you look at the limestone. Mr. Haley went on to have 9 children. Next slide. And yep, there's the mansion. As you can see, it used to have a cast iron fence, wrought iron fence in front. Next slide. And here's a Darcy Mansion. And that's another old Joliet name. Haley's married into Darcy's. And let's see, John Darcy was from County Wexford and married to Margaret Walsh. He settled in Joliet in 1851. He was a successful cattle buyer and real estate owner. There's a street named after the Darcy family in the St. Pat's neighborhood. And this mansion used to be next to the Haley, and they moved it about, 15, 20 years ago, moved it across the street. Next slide. This is the Darcy family chandelier. My late mom bought that. It's gas and electric, and there used to be 2 of them in the mansion. She sold one, kept the other. Now I have it at my house. Next slide. Here's young John Darcy and his mother. This 1929 clipping is of Mrs. John Darcy Jr. with her young son, John Darcy III. This particular generation of the family lived on Oneida Street. Next slide. O'Donnell family, as John married Jeanette, and Jeanette's in this photo with her sisters and her mother. Jeanette's still very much around, and I chat with her sometimes on Facebook. She's in my genealogy group. Jeanette's father, Harold O'Donnell, was born in 1892 in Quincy, Illinois, to Michael and Eva Ryan O'Donnell. The O'Donnells were from County Mayo, and the Ryans from Tipperary. Next slide. Ancient Order of Hibernians. How many times are you on Cass Street, and you're going toward the bridge, and you see this building here? Did you ever notice the symbols? Those are all Celtic symbols at the top. There's a cross, different things to represent the Irish. And the AOH was a fraternal organization for Irish. And at the time, only men could belong, but they did have social dances, and that's how my great-grandparents met. They met at one of their dances. And AOH had, at one time, 3 or 4 chapters in Joliet, which made me wonder, like, did they argue with each other? Because I didn't see the need for that many meetings. But, it's funny, because Tim Brophy's family was on the board at AOH, and then my great-grandpa Murphy was there, too. And, today we have Irish American Society, Wil County. Next slide. And here's, like I was saying, here's one of the chapters. They got Hibernian Rifles Organization. Then they also have the hall on Chicago Street. And looks like there's another one on there, too. Next slide. Okay, Gleason family, you know what? I meant to pull this one because I couldn't find my citation for that. Can we go to the next one? Okay, Frank Doyle and the Hotel Joliet. Frank Doyle retired as chief of Hotel Louis Joliet in 1941. He was born in 1886 and moved to Joliet as an infant. His parents were Peter and Bridget Carnes Doyle. They were both born in Ireland and married in Wil County. Frank was married to Celestine Ferret, who came up here from, her family came from Louisiana and were of French descent. And Frank was Mr. Hotel Louis Joliet. He worked there for many, many years. Next slide. All right, where's our Cronin? You got to raise your hand. All right, both of you got to raise your hand. Okay, here's 4 generations of the Cronin family. It's a very early Irish name in this community. John Cronin was the son of Irish immigrants Robert Emmett and Mary Ellen Scannell Cronin. They came to Joliet in 1863. I considered him a jack of all trades. His resume included head bookkeeper for Edwin Porter Brewery. He was a bookkeeper for Ashley Wire Company. He was a steel mill worker. He was a clerk at the Duncan Hotel. And he had a desk appointment with Joliet City Police. He accomplished all of this before heading into politics, serving as city treasurer and eventually mayor of Joliet. Cronin also devoted himself to Joliet Elks, the White Cross, Western Catholic Union, and Ancient Order of Hibernians. And let's go to the next slide. There's Mary Cronin, the paperweight I talked about. My mom found this at a garage sale years ago. It's marble, and it's a paperweight. It's probably like 120, 130 years old, and it says, Mary Cronin. I need one that says Mary Gannon, or Mary Keegan, because that's my married name, but I don't use it. I know, I'm bad. I said to my husband, not to sidetrack her, I said, if I stay with you 20 years, he's not here, I will change my name. So I got till June now. It'll be 20. He said he was coming, but I don't see him. So. All right, let's go to the next slide. Private William Cronin. Here's an article from 1921 about the body of Troy Township war hero Private William Cronin being flown back home. He died of wounds received at the Battle of Argonne. William was the son of Mary, who we just saw. Okay, next slide. All right, we've got Margaret Reinyak and her sisters on Caesar Street. You know where Caesar Street is in the St. Pat's neighborhood? Yeah, this house is still there. It looks a little different, but it's still there. I got this from my friend Patrick Yak, who now lives in Alaska. And Patrick came back here, I think in the last year. He had to go see the house. He hadn't been here in many years. Anyway, let me see. Mary Ryan was born in Northern Ireland in 1855 and became a widow, and these are her relatives. All right, next one. Catherine Daly Kelly. I know we have a couple Kellys here, and we probably have several Kelly families that were in this area. Catherine Daly Kelly was born in 1857 to Eugene and Bridget Thompson Daly. And I know somebody mentioned Thompsons earlier. Eugene was born in 1826 in County Longford, Ireland. He was a furniture maker and funeral director in Joliet, as well as holding several county offices, including coroner. Next slide. Emmett McGuire. Anybody here remember Emmett McGuire? Oh, he was kind of a big deal in the day. Former Joliet Township Highway Commissioner Emmett McGuire was born in 1897 to Patrick and Mary Byrne McGuire. His ancestors came to Joliet from County Wexford, Ireland in the 1850s. He was active in public service and knew many people in town, and he even got to meet President Kennedy when he came here. Just anybody in the room who was here when Kennedy came to Joliet? Oh, yes, wonderful. Okay, next slide. This is the Connor Foster family. It was courtesy of my friend James Foster. A photo taken about 1914 in the home of his great-grandfather, James Connor, who lived at the southwest corner of Hunter and McDonough Street. And next slide, we've got the McNiff family. They settled in this area fairly early. Family patriarch was born in Ireland in 1816. Arriving in New York in 1837, he married Bridget Clary. They moved to Rhode Island before settling in Joliet in the 1850s. Here are descendants Barney and William. Next slide. And another descendant was Catherine McNiff, who ran a local dancing school. Next slide. Mortimer Sullivan family of Ridgewood. So we were saying this is Mortimer Sullivan outside one of his stores. He had one on Collins Street, and you said Ward Avenue. He lost his stores during the Great Depression. He then worked for the EJ&E. Sullivan went to work for the EJ&E. Tragedy struck the family again when, on only, is this correct, second day of work? Wow, second day of work at the EJ&E, he drowned on the job.
He hitchhiked on a slow-moving freight train that was coming out of the steel mill to the J yards. It was night. He was hanging off the caboose. He did not see a utility pole. Knocked him out, and he fell into a coal pit that was full of water.
Oh, dear Lord.
No OSHA, no anything like that those days. So then his widow moved to Ridgewood Avenue in Ridgewood, where she continued to raise my great aunt and my grandma.
I think I have her in the next slide.
Yep. And to her left, that's my dad.
Oh. All right, let's go to our next slide. Okay, we got Charles McKenna from Monaghan, Ireland. Charles McKenna came to Illinois from Monaghan, Ireland. He married Bora Dunford in 1885. He managed the Caton Farm in Plainfield on Caton Farm Road, which was owned by Judge Caton. Next slide. These two pens, oh, I wish I owned these. They belong to my friends Tim and Michelle Smith of Plainfield, and they're also local historians, and they're very much into the Civil War. This is the 23rd Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment, known as the 1st Irish, or Irish Brigade. It was an infantry regiment that served in the Union Army during the American Civil War. 23rd Illinois Infantry was organized at Chicago, Illinois, and mustered into federal service on June 15, 1861. And our next slide. Now we're talking Hennessy's. Oh, Karen's happy. Where's my other Hennessy gentleman? Oh, yay, yay. Okay, did you know there were 2 Mayor Hennessy's in Joliet? The first was William. He served as city commissioner and chief of police before becoming mayor from 1931 to 1935. William's father, David, was born in 1832 in Tipperary. Let's see, his descendants are still in Joliet today. You might know some of them by other last names, such as Ward, Maloney, Mazak, Williams, Arling, and of course, Hennessy. My friend Karen Ward says that the Hennessy family has been serving Joliet for more than 100 years. They're still in public service today. Great family. Let's go to our next, oh, here we are, Hennessy Bridal Shower. Look at that, complimentary to Miss May Hennessy of Comstock Street, 24th of this month. She became the bride of Harry McGuire. And you know what I like about all these old write-ups? They'll tell what everyone ate, what they wore. You know, it's like, to me, that's like need to know stuff. Look at here, it mentions May Corcoran. We've got McPartland mentioned in this. Hennessy, Butler. Yeah, good stuff. Next one. There's Mayor Hennessy, circa 1961. James Hennessy places a call on the loop walk-up telephone. Phones are the first to be installed in any city outside Chicago. All right, next. And here's some later Hennessy generation. I found this last fall. These are Albert and Therese Hennessy's children in Crest Hill. And you can see by the amount, there's a snowman for every child. I'm going to move back so you can see how many snowmen are there. That's a big Irish family. All right, next one. Okay, Joliet city government in 1915. Here's a look at our city leaders in 1915. More Irish names now, including Barry, Murphy, O'Callahan, Morrissey, and Lennon. Next slide. We got the Williams family of Cagwin Street. The Williams were related to the Hennessy family. Catherine Williams lived on Cagwin with her family. Catherine Roach Williams was the widow of Everett Williams. Her family was from Manhattan, and the Everetts were from Joliet. Next slide. And then here we go again with another Williams girl. Next slide. The Whelan family of Joliet. I don't think it's your Whelans. I think it's a different Whelan. I got this photo from Paul Carpenter, who lives in LaSalle County. It shows his relative William, and I know William had a saloon off of Collins Street, but I'm having a hard time getting more info on that one. Next one, McCarthy family of Chase Avenue. Anybody know Owen McCarthy? Yeah, isn't he a great man? Yeah, I am like honored to say, that's my friend. And this is his ancestors here. There's obviously multiple Owens, grandfather to father to son. But anyway, De La Salle Joliet Catholic had many star athletes over the decades. One of them everyone should know was Owen McCarthy. He played several sports and was part of the 1928 championship basketball team. And this is Owen, who was part of that team. This is his parents, John and Roseanne McCarthy of Chase Avenue, with their children. He went to St. Louis University on scholarship. He was captain for 3 years, but he left because the family needed him to help out at home. Next slide. And see, there's Owen there when he was on the championship team. And did you know they introduced that championship basketball team at the Rialto, and they had Lois Delander there to cheer them on. I just think that's so neat. Next slide. Speaking of McCarthys, we have the McCarthy Walsh family, Michael and Bridget McCarthy. This photo is courtesy of Barb Nick Lyons, her great-grandparents, Michael and Bridget McCarthy, immigrants of Ireland. 8 of the 10 children are pictured here. Let's see. They lived on East Jackson Street. Next slide. Mary O'Leary. Many Irish women didn't have, if they weren't going to get married, what were they going to do? They could clean, they could cook, they could teach. And Mary was a teacher. This photo was taken about 1912. Mary lived on Hickory Street in Joliet. She was a teacher at Joliet Township for 40-plus years. She was born in 1844, and she never married because at that time, if you got married, they didn't let you teach anymore. So a lot of women chose to be single because they loved teaching. Next slide. James P. Murphy, he was a pioneer, and he was also part of the temperance movement. You guys know what the temperance movement was? Kind of like Carrie Nation and taking the hatchet to all the saloons. And this kind of flew in the face of being Irish since, we like our beverage. But this is Jim Kelly's great-great-grandfather, James Murphy, born 1816 in Doon Feeney, Ballycastle Parish, County Mayo. His connections to this area in Joliet have the following last names: Carroll, Terrell, Hand, Lee, Black, Kelly, Shea, Welch, Riley, O'Brien, and Dunn. James P. Murphy came to Joliet in 1858. He spent some time in Chicago before that, engaging in the tailor trade. But the temperance movement was a big part of what he wanted to do. Next slide. Speaking of temperance, another proponent of it was my ancestor, Patrick Peter McCarthy. Everybody familiar with Morning Star Mission? He was a one-man band, Morning Star Mission. And it's funny because he was born on St. Patrick's Day, and I don't know what happened, but he decided he didn't want to be Catholic anymore, so he thought, I'm going to change my name to Peter. He didn't want to change the McCarthy, but he thought if he had a nice German first name, people wouldn't think he was Irish and Catholic, but he had the last name. And so he quit being Catholic, and my mom remembers him sitting outside the bank collecting money for the poor. He would go over to my great-grandparents' house, and he would try to minister them. He was always trying to convert them, and they're like, no, no. But he was a great man, you know? I mean, he did it all by himself. He didn't, and he took no money for it. You know, he didn't get paid to do it. He just did it because it was the right thing to do. Next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about Whiskey Row. And, you know, where was Whiskey Row? You guys know? Collins Street, that's right. So it's full of Irish saloons. And many names associated with those saloons. I believe Lochran, O'Hara. Let me check my notes. Lochran, McGlone, Massey, Conway, O'Hara. Okay, now we're looking at James Burns Saloon. And I picked this one because this is like one of the last buildings left on Collins Street, and there's just so much empty space, and a lot of the buildings are gone. It's now a Mexican restaurant, which is very good. But you look at the top, it says James Burns, 1905. And you can still see that. It's right by the prison. Let me see what I have on him. Let's see. It shows he was born in Carlinstown, County Meath, Ireland, married to Mary Nolan of Joliet. Next slide. And here's Whalen's Tavern. Whalen, when we talked about William Whalen a couple minutes ago, this was what you could get at the bar. You could get a comb to comb your hair in a nice leather case, too. Got nice little souvenirs, better than a coaster. Next one. O'Hara and Buckard liquor dealers. This belongs to my friend Kevin Smith, Tim and Michelle's son. James O'Hara was born in 1860, so James and Anna Burke O'Hara. Next slide, slide 67, Daniel Feely. Daniel Feely was a wholesale dealer in meats and provisions. His business was at the Clement Building on Ottawa Street. He was also alderman of the 5th Ward. Next slide. Okay, when I saw it said Buffalo Buffet, I think of buffet, I'm like, yeah, I could wear my eating pants and there's gonna be like lots of good food. But a buffet at that time was a bar, and maybe they had peanuts. But this is a pocket mirror, so you could get a comb inside a leather case at the bar. You could get a nice little pocket mirror with a pretty little girl on it. And this is the Buffalo Buffet, which was owned by Bannon and Feely. Thomas Bannon and Thomas P. Feely. And that's in my collection. I really like it. It's very cute. Next one. Callahan Family Home on Comstock. I like researching all the different houses in town. And several years ago, I was driving through St. Pat's. I said, that house has a horseshoe-shaped window. I bet that was an Irish family who lived there. So I dug out my city directories, and you have to figure out when the city renumbered the houses in 38 and then go backward and figure out what it was the house number when it was built. So this particular home is the Callahan family home. The Callahans have their roots in County Cork. Several people lived in this house, including Tim Callahan, who owned Callahan's Buffet, another buffet, which was a saloon with food, which to me says sports bar. Next slide. Patty McCann. This photo is from Janet Carr. Her grandfather, Patrick James McCann, was born in Chicago, but his parents were from Ireland, County Antrim and Donegal. He was the youngest of 8 children and settled in Joliet. He worked on bridge construction downtown, and in later years worked as a bartender at the College Inn. And what did the College Inn become? Oh, Charlie's, yes, and we'll talk about them in a minute. Okay, next slide. Matthew Harney. This is captain of Joliet Police Department. He came to Joliet at age 8 in 1867. In 1884, he was made captain of the police department. I believe this family is from Kilkenny, but I'm still researching them. Next slide. Norton Family Home. This house is on Broadway, but it looks a lot different now, but at least it's still there. The Nortons married into the Dwyer family of County Carlow, who married into the Dolan family of Bluff Street that we saw earlier. This was also in that bargain bin box for $5 that Mom got at the estate sale. Next slide. St. Mary Carmelite. Anybody belong to St. Mary's? Did you go to church there? Yeah. Anybody go to school there? All right. St. Mary Carmelite. And we talked earlier about Patrick Bannon building this. Look at that steeple. You know, amazing, amazing church. Let's see. Built by Patrick Bannon. It served many families for many years. It's now undergoing renovations for a potential banquet hall. They just tore down the priory so that they can get a crane on the property and put a new roof on the church. Next. My friend and co-worker Stephen Joseph Wright managed to get a hold of this very rare newspaper from the parish. They put out their own newspaper. It was called the St. Mary's Messenger, and it was done 1870. There's almost no copies of it. He drove to Springfield to get it. That's how much he loves history, you know. And I was like, yeah, you go. No, I don't have to drive. But I was grateful for him to get it. Next one. St. Mary's Confirmation Class 1922. Because you never know where you're going to find like a treasure if it's not at a garage sale or a resale shop. I found this at a resale shop in Joliet a few years ago. I'm like, oh, that's St. Mary's. I got to have it. I'm not sure why they call it confirmation because they look too young. They look like communion. But look at how packed that church was. You know, a lot of people were there. This is when the parish was bursting at the seams, and many Irish at that time said, you know what, we got to start going to a different parish. And that's why a group, including my family, the Murphys, decided to get together and form St. Ray's because there just wasn't enough room. Next one. And this is a photo out of the museum's collection. This is from the Conway family. And they too were at St. Mary's before St. Raymond's opened. Next slide. This is the Harney-Giblin wedding. Took place at St. Mary's Carmelite in 1881. Both parties are well known and have hosts of friends in the city. The groom is employed at Joliet Steel Mill. They will reside in a neat little cottage on North Chicago Street. And here's the gifts. Thomas Gorey gave a silver pickle caster. And then they got a silver cream pitcher, another silver pickle caster, a silver tea set, a silver butter dish. Nellie McPartland gave them a set of vases. Mrs. Nora Mullen gave them a silver napkin ring. Mrs. Lawler gave them a silver spoon. That's a lot of polishing. That's why you have all those kids, and then they can go polish. Next slide. This is a flag dedication at St. Mary's, and as you know, Providence was right there next to it. Building's gone now before they went to New Lenox, and these are some lovely young Irish women there. Next one. Here's some more lovely Irish ladies of St. Mary Carmelite. They're planning a big St. Patrick's party in 1944. And next one. Oh boy, we've got Miss Erin Gobra. And we've got her mama back there. Put your hand up in the air. Yeah, that's her mom. And that's Marilyn Kinsley. Kinsley family immigrated from Ireland prior to 1811. Their family patriarch was Edward Kinsley, born in Virginia that year, who was married to Mary Larkin. By the 1860s, the family was living in Osable near Dresden. They had 7 children. Frank Kinsley's family lived on Gardner Street, with the children initially attending public schools in Sacred Heart. Descendants worked at various businesses in town, including Ducker's, United Wallpaper Mill, and one owned a place called the Spoke Shop. Now here we are talking about Marilyn, who was born in 1923 and was married to Edward Johnson. Prior to that, she attended Providence High School. When it was still downtown, she was crowned the school's Miss Erin Gobra. Edward and Marilyn had 3 children, including my coworker and friend Mike Johnson and his sister back there. Next slide. And as we're talking about Kinsleys, we got to talk Whalen Ward family, who's tied to them. This is Mike Johnson's ancestor, Mary Whalen Ward, who was married to Michael Ward. Mary was born in 1863 in County Carlow and came to America 20 years later. Her husband, Michael, was also from County Carlow. Next slide. Here's the attractive Fay family. You remember Fays? Yeah. In this photo is my late neighbor, Jim Fay, for years who ran Champion Machinery. It's now run by one of his sons. Jim's parents, William and Helen Maloney Fay, those were his parents. The Fay's roots are in County Cavan, Ireland, and the Maloneys are from Limerick. And you know the big house, where, you know where Dr. Ray lives? Or well, where his widow lives? Big house, when you come to the end of Western at Ray, the big, big mansion. Fay family moved there during the Depression because it was owned by the Moore-Stowe family. They lost the house during the Depression, the Moores did, but they were able to keep the stove business. And the bank didn't know what to do. They said the only person in town who had enough money to buy the house were Fays. And they said, well, we already have a nice house, we don't need to move. But they did move there, and they changed the name of it because the mansion was originally called Westmore, and then the Fays changed the name to Sunny Lawn. And it's only had 3 owners now. The Ray family owns it. And my son Murphy wants to live there someday. He's obsessed with it. Next slide. Megan Fay. Let's see. As Jim Fay got older, he married Peggy Cunningham of Manhattan, Illinois. Her family was originally from Dublin. They had 4 boys and 1 girl, Megan. Many of you will recognize Megan from movies she's done, like La La Land, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, but my favorite was when she was on Roseanne and she played that snooty neighbor from Chicago. Oh, I adored her. And she's nothing like the neighbor. She's very nice. I like her a lot and her brothers. Next slide. Local Irish lassies. This was courtesy of my cousin Mike Barron, showing a group of secretaries outside Champion Machinery. Surnames for these gals include Murphy, O'Connor, and Maloney. Next slide. Emmett Ahern and his wife Kitty Gannon, no relation to me, Ahern. They were both born in Chicago and later moved to Joliet. Emmett ended up working in the county auditor's department and lived on Woodworth in the Upper Bluff. Their roots are in County Waterford. Next, McDermott Arda. Here's Mary McDermott Arda celebrating her 87th birthday in 1949. She was born in Wilmington in 1862 to James McDermott and Catherine Keir, who came here from County Roscommon. Mary's husband, John Arda, was the son of Patrick Arda and Mary Ellen Kinney. They're from Kildare, Ireland, and they settled in Shanahan Township. Lots of Arda still in this area today. Next slide is the Moran home on Center Street. This belonged to the Morans, John, Michael, George, William, Annie, and Emma. George was a plumber, Michael a superintendent, and John an assistant superintendent. I believe they were active in Joliet politics at this time. They were also members of Ancient Order of Hibernians. My mom's childhood friend, Kate Pemble, lives in this house now, and she's been there for many years. Next slide. Oh, St. Pat's Church. Remember how I said before we started off on Broadway, and then it got too many parish members, so they had to build a new church. And this church was built by Charles Wallace. Next slide. Charles' ancestors came to Joliet in Manhattan from New York and Canada, originally living in Westmeath, Ireland. Names tied to the Wallaces are Haggerty and Welsh, and they have Wallaces in Manhattan. They also have Mahoney's. I'm friends now. I'm doing an estate sale for the Wallace family. So, next slide. St. Pat's Schools, circa 1930s. This photo comes from my friend Kathy Charlie. We talked about old Charlie's earlier. And this photo has her mom in there. And her mom was a Lyons. And let's go to our next one. Okay, here's 3 Irish lassies, 3 Irish Colleens, featured on the front cover of the Joliet Spectator in 1953. Names include McDonald, Kelly, and Wallace. I think Barb Wallace. Next. Okay, you live in Joliet long enough, you gotta know one of the Canes. You get your teeth done maybe with one of the Canes. A lot of dentists in that family. I used to teach skating to one of the kids. Anyway, the Canes moved to St. Pat's Reedswood area. John was born in Chicago, later moved to Joliet. He was married to Cecilia Boglin. Their sons became dentists, and we still have many Canes here today. Next slide. Hennebury Brothers clothing. This photo is courtesy of Tim and Michelle Smith. Thomas Hennebury was born in Limerick in the 1840s, and he married a Cane. He had a clothing store downtown Joliet. Next slide. St. Raymond's, before it became the cathedral. As Joliet's Catholic population began to grow, there was a need for another parish. 287 families were founding members of this parish. And when it was built, the priest said, someday we're going to have a cathedral here. And I think everybody looked at him like, no, that's not going to happen. But it did. And not that long after either. It was mostly made up originally of Irish and a few German Catholics. My family were founding members, the Murphys. Some of the other founding families were Dolan, McGowan, Corbley, Jones, Lye, Kelly, Shaughnessy, McManus, and McCanus. St. Ray's was headed by Father Scanlon until his death in 1941. Next slide. Oh, and I meant to tell you, stay on this picture, but you know that previous picture? I found that on eBay about 15 years ago, because I'm always looking for Joliet stuff. And then the guy I bought it from, I found out he was like my second cousin. He was a senior, and nobody had ever heard from him. He left town as a young man. I don't know what happened, but he never spoke to the family again. It was very sad. He was a Jones. And he said, I just don't want it anymore. And then he talked to me a few times about genealogy, and then I think he passed. But that was one of the photos. And speaking of eBay, see, now I'm telling all my secrets. I got this photo because I'm looking for Joliet, but there's two little girls in the middle. They're twins. And it's my grandma and her twin sister, Dorothy. I was going to buy this regardless because it was St. Ray's and it's Joliet. But when I saw them, and I have like very few pictures, I'm like, I have to have this no matter what. And thank God nobody bid against me. But anyway, yeah, that's Grandma Mary Murphy Mulvey Hill, and her twin sister, Dorothy Murphy Butterbach. And this was a neat class. These kids were all born in 1920. Miriam McFarland, daughter of Packy McFarland, was in this class. Packy Webb. Anybody remember Packy Webb? And you still hear the commercial today's, the whole town's talking about the Webb boys. Don't sing, Mary Beth. But yeah, the Webb boys were Packy's sons. Also in this class was Ray Schuster and a Goslin girl from Phoenix Horseshoe. Next slide. This photo is from our collection at the museum, and it was donated by the Conway family. The Conway children were at St. Ray's in the 1920s. They lived on Rainer Avenue and Buell, at the corner of Rainer and Buell, and I don't believe any of them ever married. They left everything to the church. They gave us some of the photos. House is still there today. Next slide. We got some St. Raymond students, circa 1931. This is another one of my eBay finds. Next slide. All right, who's the Briscoe? Yay! Okay. Mr. and Mrs. T.A. Briscoe celebrate their golden wedding anniversary in 1929. How many people do you think were at this? Take a guess. 600 people. And the party was so big, they had to have it at the Chamber of Commerce. It's your people. Surnames mentioned in this clipping include Whalen, Talbot, and Schaefer. All right, next slide. Lyons Lumber family. Now, this house is still on Oneida. I think it's Oneida and Clement, maybe? I don't think it's Oneida and Wilcox. I think it's Clement. It looks different now. It's the roof line's different, but it's still a great house. So we're talking about the Lyons family. I know of at least 3 different families with that surname. This is the John Lyons Mansion on Oneida Street. Family patriarch John was born in 1834 in County Longford, Ireland. Mr. Lyons went to New York and eventually settled in Joliet with a lumber yard on Bluff Street, then Washington Street. His descendants are still in the Joliet area today. Next slide. Okay, here's Bud and Mary Jane Lyons. Speaking of descendants, I got these from my friend Sarah Andriano. Sarah's late mom was Sue Lyons Andriano, the lawyer, and this is Sue's mother and father. Next slide. And here's Sue and her sisters, Sandy and Sarah, and they're also with the Kelly children, and I wasn't able to figure out which line of Kelly these are. Maybe they're on Rayner Avenue is what Sarah was thinking maybe. Next slide. All right, here we go. Here are the Lyons girls again. They're a little bit older, and they're at St. Raymond's Church. And next slide. We talked earlier about the O'Donnell girls in Plainfield, and then they married into the Darcy family. Well, here's Sue Lyons with her lifelong friend, Penny O'Donnell, one of the O'Donnell girls we saw earlier. All right, next one. So here's a different Lyons family. Another Lyons family is the Leonard Lyons family. They're originally from Odell, Livingston County, Illinois. They came to Joliet. Mr. Lyons came here. Leonard Lyons came with his wife, Margaret McFadden. Leonard Lyons served as city commissioner. He was also quite the baseball player and knew Babe Ruth. Next slide. There's Leonard running for commissioner. Next slide. And who recognizes somebody in here? Yeah, Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth in Joliet. He was at St. Joe's Park. Yeah. And I got this photo from Kathy Charlie. Pretty neat. Next slide. And this is Kathy's late father, Bob Charlie. And we talked earlier about Old Charlie's Bar on Center Street, which used to be the College Inn. And then we talked earlier, I think it was Patrick McKenna. I can't believe I'm remembering all this. But Patrick used to work at College Inn. The Charlies came out of LaSalle County, and one of them was mayor of the city of LaSalle during the 19th century. And next one. Now here are all the Charlies, minus Kathy, because she wasn't born yet. But there's Kathy's brothers and her late sister, Mary Beth, and I adored Mary Beth. She was a really fun woman. And the funny thing is, Mrs. Charlie and Mrs. Charlie's mother used to hang out with my great-grandma and my grandma. And now Kathy dates a man who was also, his grandmother was part of that group of ladies, and they would go around and have all-night poker parties. And they bet on horses, and they do fun things. They were a neat group. Next slide. Okay, later Irish wave. So a lot of us came here during the famine, but there was like a whole other group that came at the end of the 19th century. And many of them came from County Cork. So let's talk about the County Cork invasion, or I like to call it the County Cork compound. And here we are, I call this is Cork country. And Cork country is Collins and Jackson and goes up to about Abe Street. And some of the names that are associated with that are McCarthy, Sullivan, Mahoney, Murphy, Boucher, a lot of them. Next one. And here's one, Morris and Mary Ellen Murphy McCarthy. And these photos are courtesy of Dee Trisna. These are her ancestors, Morris and Ellen Murphy McCarthy. They too were from Bantry, County Cork, and are tied to Peter McCarthy. Let's go to our next one. So I told you before about Patrick, real name, changing it to Peter McCarthy. Anyway, he was, I believe, a nephew of my great-great-grandmother. And he ministered to many people, helped a lot of people. Morning Star Mission's still around today. And they too are Bantry, County Cork. Next one. Sullivans. We got lots of Sullivans. Remember I said we were probably related, these County Cork? This is the woman I'm named after, my grandma was named after. This is Mariah Sullivan Murphy, and when she was here, everybody in town called her Aunt Mary. Women didn't have the right to vote, but she would help Irish immigrants settle here and get the men registered to vote so that they would support local Irish causes. So she couldn't vote herself, but she made sure everyone else did. And because she helped the new immigrants get settled, everyone called her Aunt Mary. So in turn, my grandma was named after her, and I'm named after Grandma. Next one. JJ and Daniel Sullivan. And this is, I believe, another one of her relatives, and I didn't know I was related. Did anybody know Rocky Osick here? You know Rocky. Okay. I didn't know Rocky and I were related till I did Ancestry DNA. And we started looking, and then we realized it's that Bantry County Cork Sullivan thing going again. And that's Rocky's grandpa. Next one. We talked about Murphy's here, and this is Aunt Mary. I told you about Aunt Mary's family home on Abe Street, which no longer stands. And this is my great-grandma, Mary Elizabeth Dolan, marrying Carolus Charles Murphy. And then that's Grandma and her twin at the Boston store. Next one. And then here's another family that's tied to these county courts, the Tracys. This is a clipping of Dennis. He was the son of Harry and Seal Tracy. His siblings included Robert, Harry, and Mary. Dennis was known for being Santa Claus around Joliet for many years. When he returned from the service, he was a beat cop in Joliet. He was hit on the back of the head with a bat during a gas station robbery, and he lost most of his sight. Next. E.J.N.E. Railroad. A big employer of local Irish was the Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Railroad, which ran from 1889 to 2013. Anybody have family that worked at the J? Yeah, easy jobs, everyone? Yeah. Did you know that when the J was formed, they had two unions? One was for the Catholics, and one was for the Protestants, because they did not get along. There was still that little pushback. Let's go to our next one. Okay, so by the time this photo was taken, and this is from the 1930s, there was just one union. And that's my great-grandfather, Peter Francis Gannon, in the middle. He was sergeant at arms, and he made sure that anybody working for the J was a union man. And if you weren't, then you didn't want to deal with Peter. Next slide. So we're talking about Gannons. My great-grandfather, Peter Gannon, was born in Achill Island, County Mayo. It's one of the few places I know of in Ireland where people still speak the original language. Pete's family came to America at the end of the 19th century, settling in Boston before moving to Cleveland. And we were talking Cleveland before. Pete was the only one who came to Joliet. I don't know what happened, but the rest of them are still in Cleveland. And they kept marrying other families from Achill Island who moved to Cleveland. Anyway, I talked about that, and then on the left is my grandpa, Ed Gannon, who worked at the Rialto. He played in the pit, and he had a chance to go on the road, but he had a wife and a baby. He used to play with all the big band favorites. He played with Tommy Dorsey, a bunch of them. That's my dad, that's my grandma, Marie Zaworski Gannon, and then those are my parents, Judy Mulvihill and Ed Gannon. Next slide. We were talking Terry, right? My cousin Terry Gannon. And this is the next generation. That's me 20 years ago. But the neat thing, like a lot of people remember Jim Gannon, or they remember Kenny, or they remember Richie. Richie was my dad's best friend. Richie died very young. Anyway, Terry was a great basketball star. He was a star at Catholic High. He was a star in college. After college, he went into sportscasting. He was working for ABC. I was working for ABC. We were both reporters on air at the same time. Different affiliates. He was network, and I was affiliate. And now I'm out of TV, and I'm here, and I love being here. Terry's still sportscaster, though. Next one. All right, I know she wasn't born here. You're like, wait a minute, she's from Chicago. But there's nobody like more Joliet ever than then Kitty Softcheck. Who remembers Kitty? Yeah, Kitty Kilgallen Softcheck. Grew up in Englewood. Her parents were from Kilshama, County Mayo. And I guess Chicago wanted to start a St. Patrick's Day parade, and they wanted a pretty Irish girl to be the queen. So they walked in St. Sabina's Parish, and they said, you're going to be our queen. You're the prettiest girl here. We're going to pick you. So she was the first parade queen. And then Kitty and her husband moved here, and they had a lot of children. I guarantee you, kind of like our Hennessy's and some of these other names I talk about, you're going to know one of their relatives. And Kitty was also related to Dorothy Kilgallen. Remember Dorothy Kilgallen? Yeah, that was her cousin. And Kilshama is really tiny. And when I got talking to Kitty one day, and she said, what's your husband's name again? And I started talking. And then she said, and who's his father? And she said, well, they lived the next block over. Those were my cousins. So I'm like an honorary Softcheck, or at least I'm pretending to be one. Yeah, or my son is. Yeah, you're a Softcheck. Yeah, you're a Kilgallen, actually, because Kilshama, very small. Next slide. This is Mrs. Marie Evans. She was a Miss Joliet and a Miss Illinois, and I believe she has Fitzpatrick in her line. I meant to put more on that one. I didn't get around to it. But I want to show this photo to her daughter, Denise. She got pretty far into the pageant. I think she was close to almost winning. So, great lady. She modeled, moved, stayed in Joliet. Nice woman. Next slide. Noble sport of pugilism. In 1886, an amateur boxing match involving two steel mill workers named Riley and Moriarty, who both loved to box. 3,000 people showed up for this fight at Spring Creek on the city's far east side, where the EJ&E later built a roadhouse. Chief of Police James Hanna showed up on a large white horse and was prepared to stop the fight. He ended up retreating after the crowd threatened to throw the police chief into the creek. At the end of each round, Moriarty and Riley were doused in the creek. It took 78 rounds before there was a winner, and the winner was Mr. Riley. Steelworkers celebrated for a week and refused to go back to work. The mill was shut down until everyone was done properly celebrating. All right, next one. This is my great-grandfather, John Pierce Mulvihill. He died when I was very little. I got to meet him. He was born in LaSalle County and came to Joliet as a child. He was the grandson of Edward and Catherine Shea Mulvihill. Mulvihill means St. Michael in Irish. Anyway, he was a bookie after he boxed. He went to go work for, anybody remember Butch Crowley? Lawrence Butch Crowley? Yeah, he was a bodyguard and a bookie for him. We'll talk about Butch in a moment. Next one. These are my grandparents, Mary Murphy and Johnny Mulvihill with my late mom. Mary Murphy's family came from Cork, as we said before, Carlow and Kilkenny, and Mulvihills are from County Kerry. Johnny was train master at the J and died young due to a lung condition. I wouldn't be here without these three people. They inspire me constantly to keep researching the past, and I hope all of you keep researching. Next one, Packy McFarland. Who remembers Packy? Or at least you know the name. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't remember him because he died a long time ago, but still, you'd know the name. Probably the most famous boxer in the world in the early 1900s was Packy McFarland of Chicago and later Joliet. His skill was so respected that other people took up the moniker Packy, including Packy Webb. Packy Webb decided to call himself Packy because of Packy McFarland. And Bob Hope was so impressed with Packy McFarland, and this was before Bob Hope was famous, that Bob Hope started calling himself Packy East because he was living in Ohio. Ohio's east of Joliet. Packy McFarland married the daughter of local wealthy businessman Michael Francis Loughran. Next slide. This is Michael, born in 1844 in County Tyrone, came to Joliet in 1875. This man had very little education and was probably one of the wealthiest people to ever live in Joliet. He must have been extremely smart. He started off with a saloon, but then he went into real estate. He got this idea that, hey, people are going to move to the west side of town. I'm going to buy up as much land as I can, turn it into subdivisions, and sell it to them. And he did. You know where Guardian Angel used to be, Guardian Angel Home? That was land. He donated that to the church. The land where Our Lady Angels was, all kinds of land around town. He also was president of Joliet Pure Ice Company. He had a loan and insurance business. He was a partner at Edwin Porter Brewing, and he also became one of the organizers of Joliet National Bank. Next. Okay, there's only 3 of these known. I brought it here today, so don't even think of breathing on it. This is my Lochran, my prize bottle. Yes, I'm a nerdy nerd, but I had to have this because this was the bottle from his saloon. And I only know of 3 of them, and this is one of them. I kind of coaxed someone who collects to sell it to me. I'm like, I need it because I live in that house. I gotta have it. So here we are. Next one. All right, we call it the money pit. Other people are like, oh, your house is so pretty. No, it's a disaster. But this is a Lochran McFarland mansion. It's on Western Avenue in Prairie. And at that time, the property took up an entire city block. Mr. Lochran hired the official architect of Illinois, William Carbis Zimmerman, to build this estate in 1898. It originally had a working farm, an orchard, a 3-hole golf course, and the city's first in-ground pool. The home was redecorated by Marshall Fields in 1921, and they also put additions on the house. We've been trying to restore it. I don't know if I'll live long enough to get it restored. But I love it. It's a dream come true. Next. Here's Mr. Lochran's wife, Sarah Cassidy Lochran, with the McFarland grandchildren. This was taken in the house. Next slide. This is from my friend Sarah Ladd. It's of her mother, Miriam McFarland, getting married at the old St. Raymond's. Next. We talked a moment ago about Packy Webb and why he's called Packy. Patrick Martin Webb, born in Joliet in 1921 to Myrtle Henderson and George Calder Webb. Packy went to St. Ray's, as I said. Family patriarch John was born in 1835 in County Mayo. They came to Ohio before moving to Joliet. So whenever you hear that commercial, you'll be thinking of Packy. Next, we have Francis Lochran. Francis Lochran, born in 1897 in Joliet to Michael and Annie Egan Lochran. His father's family was from County Tyrone, and his mother's people from Kilkenny, and a lot of people remember Francis as being a lawyer. And next slide. Public service apparently runs in this family. This is my relative I discovered through Ancestry. I mean, I knew her before, but I didn't know we were related. This is Senator Meg Lochran Capel. She's a granddaughter of Francis. Meg has Irish on both sides of her family. I'm related on her mother's side, which is Cork County, County Cork, Sullivans. That's what she's got. A lot of us here. Next, Lawrence Butch Crowley. One of the most fascinating people to live in Joliet was Lawrence Butch Crowley. He was born in Joliet in 1888 to William and Ellen Scanlon Crowley. I'm not sure what part of Ireland they were from, but the Scanlons were from Tipperary. He was known for owning a radio station in Electric Park, but he was also associated with bootlegging, reportedly keeping his money inside the family crypt at Mount Olivet Cemetery. And his home on Rainer Avenue allegedly had gold doorknobs. Some people today say they were brass. I bet they were gold, and they switched them to brass later when he was broke. Next one. This was the house on Rainer. You know, the thing about Butch, October 1936, he was gunned down in his driveway, and he died not long after. I don't believe my great-grandfather was with him at the time. My great-grandfather was his bodyguard and bookie, but my family left town right after that shooting, and they didn't come back for a while. The shooting was considered a mob hit. Next, this is the only photo I could get of him, but this is Francis, the Thin Man Curry. Many legends swirl around my Grandpa Gannon's childhood friend, Francis the Thin Man Curry. Francis was born in 1902 to Robert and Alice McCraney Curry. His grandfather was from Scotland, but he married an Irish woman. The McCraneys have their roots in County Carlow. Many people associate Frances with organized crime and the disappearance of reporter Molly Zelko, as well as being friends with Snuffy Sinello. I will say this, Mr. Curry was always good to my family, as was Mr. Sinello, who got my dad into the local laborers union when you had to be Italian to join, and we were not Italian at all, we were Irish, so they were good to us. Next, Evelyn Galligan. Here's Evelyn Galligan Melcher with some friends. Evelyn was born in Indiana and later moved to Joliet. The Galligans came from Cavan, Ireland. Other surnames include McDermott and McNally. Next, Sacred Heart. We got any Sacred Heart folks here? This is another popular church with the Irish initially. Formed in 1886, school built in 1884. Parish was in Joliet's 6th Ward, which is initially an Irish neighborhood and then later Italian. Next slide. And you remember the Tylenol poisoning crisis in the early 80s? Well, growing up as a kid then, it really stunk because it canceled Halloween in Joliet that year. So I was really bummed. I was still in junior high in 82, and my mom said, well, they're going to have a sale at Sacred Heart, so why don't we go there for Halloween? I'm thinking, I want my candy. But I went to this. They were deciding they didn't want anything old at the parish anymore. They were throwing it out. They were selling it. So my mom and I went, and my mom got the pour box. Murphy, that's what it looks like. I don't know where I put it. And then I grabbed these vestments, and my mom's like, you can't touch those. And, you know, we weren't like the best at Catholics. We didn't go to Mass all the time, so I wasn't raised with that. Oh, you better not touch. But then she was like screeching. She's like, you can't have that. And I'm like, it's pretty. So I bought it anyway, and years later, when the parish was having an anniversary party, we gave back some of the vestments because it was like guilt. I'm like, oh. I still have some, though. I didn't give all of it back, just enough, and I still have the pour box. All right, next one. Okay, we got some Sacred Heart children. That's my grandpa and his sister for communion, and then over on the right, this was another garage sale find. I'm not sure what year it is, but it's SHS, Sacred Heart School. Next, artist Alice Gatons McGinnis. This was her store. You can see it on the far right. There's a sign. This postcard's from my friend Laura Rassich. Laura is an art teacher of Plainfield, and she collects McGinnis china, because Alice was an artist too. Like I said, women didn't have a lot of things they could do, you know, if you were a widow. But Alice would buy blank china from France and Germany and Austria, and she'd paint it, and she'd sell it. And she'd also paint paintings. And this was the only way to put food in her children's mouth. Next slide. So on the left is a painting Laura has. It's a watercolor done by Mrs. McGinnis. And in the middle, that's my jardiniere. It's on the table. And what's kind of cool about it is you can make it seasonal. It can be yellow kind of for fall, or you can turn it on the other side and make it pink and blue. On the right is a vase that belongs to Laura, and that's also painted by Mrs. McGinnis. Next, Blackburn Brothers. When I was visiting Laura last week, I noticed this Blackburn Brothers plate on her wall. I just started researching this line. I believe this is William Blackburn's business. He was the son of William and Cleo McCloskey Blackburn, and I believe they're tied to the Burke family. Slide one next. Okay, so you ever see antique postcards with like funny caricatures of the Irish? You know, not the most flattering. So we had Reverend Father McGuire, St. Mary's, and he preached. He said, don't go buying those. It perpetuates stereotypes. So I thought that was an interesting article. Next. Oh, you remember Joyce's? They were like royalty here, you know? They were, yes. And this was the Joyce Sitar wedding, and I think Mr. Joyce probably married one of the prettiest women in town, Miss Zora Sitar. Let me find my notes on that. Yeah, one of the most glamorous families were William Joyce and Zora Sitar. Joyce family had Joyce 7-Up in bottling. William was born in Kansas City. Their roots are in Galway, Ireland. Zora was born here in Joliet. in 1914 and tragically died in 1942. Zora and her sisters were known for their great beauty. Her sisters married into local Irish families, with Bernice marrying into the Kennedy family, Dr. Kennedy, Genevieve marrying a Hurley. After Zora's death, William Joyce remarried. He married Bernice Elizabeth Riley, better known as Jimmy. Her parents were John Hopkins Riley and Catherine Frances Kelly. Jimmy's sister, Jackie, married into the Dempsey family. So let's go to the next slide. And you can see Jimmy Riley's in that photo, and so's Mrs. Joyce. Next one, this is my friend Tom Riley's family. And I need to skip that because I think I left my note out on that. Let's go to the next one. Donahoe Kavanaugh family. Last spring, I went to a garage sale in town over by the old Catholic High, and I bought another box of photos. I couldn't stand the thought of them going into the garbage. And this is Morris Kavanaugh's family. Morris was a long-respected member of Joliet Fire Department, born in 1895 to Patrick Kavanaugh and Catherine Donahoe. His father worked at the Rock Island Railroad. Families from Sligo Parish, County Sligo. And the family lived in Ohio before coming to Wil County. Some names associated with this family are Russell, Rouse, and Quigley. Next. All right, and there's Morris there, and then these photos are on the table. I couldn't stand the thought they were going to go in the garbage. Like, I got to take them home. I also have like many other ethnic photos in my house of other people. Oh gosh, next. Corcorans. Anybody know any Corcorans? This is another family long associated with public service. Bernice Corcoran was the daughter of Police Chief James Corcoran. She married Louis Austin of Detroit in 1930. Next slide. Here's Chief Corcoran. His mother, Mary Dalton, was born in Kilkenny. They came to Joliet at the end of the 19th century. Other names tied to them include Houlihan. Next. Jim Corcoran, Joliet Fire Department. This photo is courtesy of Dave Corcoran. Next. How many of you knew that Annie Oakley had ties to Joliet? Yeah, her husband's family was here, Frank Butler. These photos are courtesy of Tim and Michelle Smith. Irish sharpshooter and Annie Oakley's husband, Frank Butler, is connected to Joliet. His parents were Michael and Carolyn, who, along with his brother William, lived in Joliet. They were here in the 1870s. Frank later moved out of the house and performed at the Buffalo Bill Show, which did come to Joliet. They were listed as being from Ireland, and he had a relative who made a living on as a shoemaker. Next, here's Billy Butler. Sharpshooting ran in the family. This is Frank's grandniece, Billy Butler. She lived in Joliet and attended JJC. This photo is from 1936 Joliet Spectator. Next. Fitzgerald, you got any Fitzgerald furniture in your house? I bet you do. Some of the finest furniture ever for sale in Joliet could be bought at Fitzgerald's, owned by Frank Fitzgerald. His parents were born in Bloomington, John and Lulu Corbett. Their son Frank married a Keogh of Lockport. Keoghs left Ireland during the famine, went to Canada before coming to America. Next. And here's some Fitzgerald descendants. This is my friend Tim Broderick, and he's not here today because I can torment him about these pants. Yes, because one of my coworkers said, "Did you see that picture of him? He wears those pants every year." Well, I thought, I'm going to include those. And there's Tim with his mom, who is a Fitzgerald. Next, Foley Ashford. You remember right before I talked about the Charlies and the Lions and running around with the ladies who played poker? One of the ladies who liked to run around and play poker was Mrs. Ashford, and she was also a friend of the family. And let me see where my note is on that. They lived in Wicklow, Ireland, came to New York, then Illinois, settled in Aurora, then Joliet. Their son, John Thomas, married Ona Foley, born in 1918. Ona Had family also in Minnesota. My friends Jackie Ashford Kempis and Bonnie Ashford are her children. Next, Larkins. Larkins everywhere. Yeah, when you hear the name Larkin today, you probably think of the avenue which was named for the farm. Larkin Avenue was once known as Outer Belt Highway. Thomas Larkin was born in the 1830s in Galway and traveled in the 1850s to New York, working his way to Lockport and eventually here in Joliet. This first photo is of the Larkin farmhouse, and I got most of these photos from Maureen, so thank you. And Thomas Larkin was married to Ellen Goss of Queens County, Ireland. They bought 80 acres here, which included Black Road to Glenwood, Woodlawn to Glenwood. That is a lot of land. Among their children were Edward, Mary, Bernard, and Thomas, and Agnes. Let's go to the next one. And here are some of the Larkin men. Maureen's from Edward's line. Edward married Mary Mooney. The Mooneys had a farm across from the Park District. And then Edward and Mary had a farm in the Glenwood Manor subdivision, which now stands. We can go to the next slide. And the street homestead in Glenwood Manor is named after the Larkin family's homestead. They also named Prestige. Let's see. Maureen's dad was the youngest of Edward and Mary's line. His name was Clarence, and he married Elizabeth Fay of Joliet. The Larkin descendants had multiple farms in Joliet, including Route 59 in Black, Ridge, and Caton. They had large families and have many descendants in the area today. Next slide. Here's some of the Larkin kin from the old sod coming to Joliet. Next, there's more Larkin Farm. This is Ray Larkin's. Next, Lennon family. Another big family in town were the Lennons. Did anybody remember Jeannie Lennon? I was impressed with Jeannie because she invited me over one day. She said, I'm going to tell you all about my husband's family. And she knew every descendant. I was blown away because I thought, well, you know, it's in-laws. A lot of people don't take the time to learn that, but she did. Widow Lennon came to Joliet during the famine with her 9 children. Her maiden name was Naughton. Her husband's buried in the area of Drum in Ross Common. She had a link to the Bannons, who we talked about earlier, who were already here. One of them took her and her 9 children in until they could find somewhere else to live. One of her children, John Lennon, married Teresa Fitzgerald. Together they had 18 children. They lived on Herkimer Street north of Jackson. John was a marble cutter. His work can easily be recognized among the many tombstones at Mount Olivet Cemetery. Most of their children went to college, which was unusual in those days. They went on to become doctors, lawyers, and insurance people. You might recognize some of their distant descendants today, such as Judge Dinah Lennon Archambault and Judge Daniel Lennon Kennedy. Next. Oh, and here's the Lennon brothers. In 1913, they won the World Championship of Brothers baseball teams. There's a copy of this picture in Cooperstown Hall of Fame in New York. Mary Louise Lennon married attorney Hayes Kennedy, who represented Greyhound. And let's see, Mary Louise Lennon's sister Emily married Harry Leinenweber, whose son is married to federal judge Lynn Martin. And Morris Lennon was an attorney who donated 2 steeples for St. Joseph Church. Next, Troy Township. So a lot of Irish from Troy. Here's the Plowing Mansion, 1932. Emmett Moran and Wilbur Sile. Coming to America allowed Irish immigrants a chance to be landowners and farm. Some of the most fertile land in the area was right there in Troy Township. Early Troy names include Tierney, Dempsey, Dillon, Fogarty, and Crogwell. Next, and we're getting close to finishing if you're getting bored or tired. I'm going to speed it up here. Crogwell family. If you travel west on Black Road past Essington, you'll notice a grade school called Troy Crogwell. Troy is for Troy Township, but Crogwell is for the John Crogwell family. His office was on Desplaines Street, but his farm and stables were located right by what is now the Dames Funeral Home. Crogwell descendants are still in Joliet, and you may know some of them by the surname Cardwell. Next, we're talking Manuka. This is the Riley Caffer anniversary. Mr. and Mrs. Martin Caffer of Minooka, married in 1866. This is their 57th wedding anniversary. Surnames mentioned include Riley, Comerford, and Brannick. They married on Thanksgiving Day in 1866, and he had a hardware business. Next. Oh, this is an auction find. Nicholas Comerford. He was born in 1862 to George and Catherine Smith Comerford. The Comerford name can be found in the Minooka area as well as Joliet. Their roots are in Wexford. Nicholas married Anna Caffer, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Caffer. They had 7 children. Next, Norton family. Oh, one of my favorite restaurants. Who eats at Cookies? Yes, you should all eat cookies. You should have pineapple cheesecake. Yeah, the peanut butter pie. Yeah, that's good. And the chicken. Oh, yum, yum, yum. For the last several decades, one of the best little restaurants in the area has been Cookies in Minooka. The restaurant was owned and named after my dad's late childhood friend, Edward Cookie Norton. You know, he got the name Cookie. Do you remember Blondie, Dagwood and Blondie? My mom one day asked Cookie's mom, Eva, she said, why do you call him Cookie? And she said, well, you know, he had the cute curly hair like the little Cookie girl. And the name stuck. Yeah, I mean, I always knew him as Cookie. Nortons lived across from the Gannon family off Shepley Road in Minooka. Cookie's mom, Eva, was my grandma's best friend, and for many years the Norton family had a tavern on their property, which is today the site of Vintage Fair. You ever go to Vintage Fair in Minooka? Yeah, and that's on the Norton land. Norton family has its roots in Dublin. They lived in Indiana for a while before settling in this area. The restaurant, Cookie's sadly gone, but the restaurant's still there today. Next, these are the 5 pretty sisters of the Brady Farm, which was near Crystal Lawns Golf Course in Joliet. Dot, Maddie, Ginny, Burry, and Kay. Surnames associated with this family include Murphy, Talbot, McDonald, Baltz, Comerford, Boyer, and Emmert. Next, Fitzpatrick, Baskerville. Now, both those names you'll hear like around Wilton, Wilmington. Fitzpatrick's came to America from Queens County, Ireland, better known as Lowes County today. William, born in Lowes in 1847. He married Mary Ellis Scrogan of Wilmington. They had 12 children. Their daughter Alice married Joseph Kelly and moved to Minooka. Nellie married John Colley, and Louise married John Murphy. And the last 2 daughters moved to Elwood. The sons lived in Joliet, Elwood, Wilmington, and Minnesota. This first photo we showed was Joseph Fitzpatrick with his wife, Nellie Baskerville. And the Baskervilles are from Tipperary. They had family in Florence Township and Wilmington. Next. And this is the Fitzpatrick farm in Shanahan, and I believe it's like by where Steppen Chemical is now. It's long gone. Next. This was Fitzpatrick home in Wilmington. This too, I believe, is gone. All right, next. Noonan O'Connell home of Shanahan. Michael Noonan, Mary O'Connell, married at St. Rose's in Wilmington. 8 children. Descendants include Stagner, Reed, Hess, and McClintock. Also tied to the Slatterys. Next. All right, you said you were here. All of Joliet beamed with pride when then presidential candidate John Fitzgerald Kennedy came to Joliet to campaign. He was leaving the Plainfield area in 1960, headed to a planned stop in Joliet when he saw this big crowd of people at Hillcrest Shopping Center. And much to his security detail's horror, he's like, no, we got to go there. So he went. And the whole parking lot was full. And in the center crowd was an elderly man holding a sign. And it said, if you don't shake my hand, I won't vote for you. So Mr. Kennedy jumped out of his car, ran ahead of security, and said, my father would never forgive me if I didn't shake your hand. And I got this fabulous story from my friend, Father John J. Comerford, who remembers meeting Mr. Kennedy a little bit further in town when he was over by the Rialto in the courthouse. Next. This is Emmett McGuire. We talked about him before. He was Highway Township Commissioner. And there he is. He's shaking Mr. Kennedy's hand. I mean, that was a big deal if you were Irish and to have a Catholic president. First Catholic president and an Irish one, too. You know, my grandma's house was full of those clippings. I said, Grandma's that our family? And she'd laugh. She'd say, no, but it was a big deal. Next one. Here's Lee Kelly with JFK. Next. And sadly, Mr. Kennedy died. And our mayor at the time, I believe, was Berlinski, and everybody was upset. You didn't have to just be Irish or Catholic. I mean, everybody was upset. So he decided to have a service at the Rialto where you could just go and cry or pray, whatever you needed to do. And that's what people did. Next. This is a Faulkner family. Did I flip this over? Dwyer. Oh, here we are. One of the most knowledgeable people regarding local Irish history is Kathy Faulkner Zavada. Kathy's been studying the different families for decades. Her father, Dr. George Faulkner, was married to Winifred. Faulkners were from Donegal and came to America in the 1870s. He was married to a Gibbons. The Gibbons were from County Mayo. One of the descendants included Raymond, who lived on Joliet's famous Diamond K Lane. Next, Patrick Dwyer, and this is called A Life of Romance. I got this clipping from my friend and distant cousin, John Manor Insurance, and I just thought that was so cool. This is another person, like, I didn't know we were related till I was older. My mom started talking, because I went to school, I went to St. Paul's with his daughter, and my mom said, oh yeah, we used to go to their house, you know, where he grew up. And yeah, so anyway, Patrick came to the U.S. in 1849. He was born in 1825. He was from County Cork. He walked from Chicago to Lisbon, Illinois. When he arrived here, he owed someone 25 cents. He already had some family in Lisbon, and they paid off his debt. And he got a job with Robert Leach's father, who had a farm. The job paid $12 a month. Patrick left the farm to travel to New Orleans, San Francisco, and Boston before coming to Minooka. He and his wife had 6 children. They had family who lived in Seward, Minooka. One of the daughters married a Brady, another married a Fitzgerald. Some of the Dwyers ended up on Western Avenue in Joliet. My great-grandmother and my mom used to visit these folks in the 50s, and I found out they were our relatives. John's an extremely generous man, and he's just a lot of fun to be around, and we love talking Irish history. Next, Susie Manor. I don't know if anybody knew Susie. Yeah, and that was John's sister. I found that in the Spectator, and he was really happy to see it. Let's see, next one. And the Kinney family. This is another family in town I really like. The Kinneys, this is the 50th anniversary photo of Mr. and Mrs. King, 1952. The Kinneys have their roots in Tipperary. Mr. Kinney's wife, Mary Farrell, was born in Iowa. Next. This is a great photo. The lady in the middle, anybody know Judge Jerry Kinney? That's his mama. And I sent that to him a long time ago. I remember Catherine Barden Kinney when I was a figure skating coach at Inwood back in the day, and she come there to support her granddaughter, who was my student. Catherine was born in 1911 to James and Anastasia Delaney Barden of Manhattan. She married Robert Kinney, and as I said before, Kinney's from Tipperary. Next. So you can't be Irish here and not have some Manhattan ties here, long associated with the families. Many moved to Joliet, many moved to Manhattan, back and forth. Manhattan Irish Fest, we just had it. This is an old depot in Manhattan. Surnames written on it include McGuire. Next. Ed Walsh Oil Company. There was more than one Walsh family in Manhattan. Walsh Oil, seen here, was owned by my great-aunt's husband, Eddie Walsh. Eddie was born in Manhattan to Thomas and Annie McGrath Walsh. Let's see, and they were from Manhattan, and their family was from County Sligo. Next, Lawler and Lawler, because it gets misspelled either way. And I don't want to put one name in and have someone mad say, no, mine's O-R, mine's E-R. So you got both. My friend Jim Lawler in Manhattan has his roots in Kilkenny County, Ireland. His ancestor Martin was born there in the 1840s, coming to America in the 1860s. He married Maggie Donnelly. They had 6 children. One of them married an Arda of Shanahan. And let's see, next one. Delaney's, another Manhattan name. Oh, they were from New Lenox in Manhattan. Richard and Elizabeth McGrath Delaney. All right, next. Delaney O'Malley family marriage, 1921. Couple married at St. Joe's Church, had a reception at the bride's home. Next. Feehan family of Wilton Township. This is from my friend and coworker Stephen Joseph Wright. His ancestors, the Feehans of Wilton Township. They came here from Ireland. Ellen married a Chidsey. They were married at St. Pat's Church in Joliet, tied to Donahoe, Fanning, and O'Brien families of this area. Next, Irish American Society County Will. We talked about this earlier. It's still active. We've got our annual dinner next Saturday. It's a great organization. If you want to join, talk to me. These are some of the founding members. Kier, Bouchers, related to them too. Charlie's. Next. And the last is my good friends and neighbors, Mayor Bob Odekirk and his wife, Rebecca. On the left is Rebecca's mom, Ruth, who was a McNamee, and the McNamees are of Joliet. And on the right is Bob's mom, Mary, who's related to Cronin's. And last, coming up here, and last one. All right, so here's what's on here, and thank you for your patience. I know I'm long-winded, and I really appreciate you hearing me out. Here's what's coming up. I have been talking to Al Baskin's family. I'm very excited about this. We are going to have an Al Baskin fashion show here. I'm going to try to get Baskin clothing. If you have any in the closets, please consider lending it to me. I'm going to get high school students. We're going to have them do a runway thing. I might get my friend Kathy to MC it. And I just think that would be so much fun. Because, you know, I did the Boston store last year, and I had the Feldman family here. The Baskin family will come for this. So if you work there, you shop there, you got memories, you need to be here. That's summer. In the fall, I remember Gordy Gillespie's Hilltopper football. Yeah, that whole golden era in the 70s, even if you didn't go to Catholic High. Everybody remember those teams, those Joyce 7-Up bottles that everyone has in their house or garage. Yeah, and I'm going to get the players here. I have the video, and we're going to let them do the talking instead of me. I'll just introduce them, and they're just going to talk about what it was like to play during that golden era in the 70s and early 80s. After that, we're going to have a history of Oakwood Cemetery. Mysterious, beautiful, spooky, cool. Lots of old history there. Things that go bump in the night. Joliet area ghost stories. A lot of you were here for that last fall. We used every chair in the building. We had to keep bringing chairs down. It was great. And then last will be, I remember Joliet's Christmas past. And that was fun too. So sharing your Christmas memories. If you have any questions, let me know. And like Kelly said earlier, if you want to become a member of the museum, it's a great thing to do. We have all kinds of programming, and if you have suggestions, I'm always open to hearing them and try to make this the best museum we can. Thank you so much.